Yeah, okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Namaste. My name is Manushmiti Baral, and it is my great pleasure as the co-founder of Udhyami Nepali to host this event and to welcome you all to the second session of the Udhyami Nepali Discussion Series. In particular, I would especially like to thank the three amazing speakers that we have here for being present here today. It is a great honor for Udhyami Nepali and the whole team to have you here with us. So introducing ourselves, Udhyami Nepali literally translates as an enterprising Nepali, and hence we are the representative voice of each of the enterprising Nepali. We tell stories of success and failures, voice concerns, and advocate for entrepreneur-friendly policies and regulations, and provide all the tools and resources to entrepreneurs in one platform through our collaboration with various ecosystem partners. Our goal is to build and serve Nepal's entrepreneurship and startup community. Introducing these particular series that we are having, since much has been talked about and discussed on the impact of COVID-19 on business and economy, very few brainstorming sessions have been conducted to see the silver linings of these unprecedented times present before us and how the businesses, entrepreneurs, and professionals can adapt and change their strategy to match the shift in culture. Therefore, Udhyami Nepali and our partner Tax Talk Nepal have come together with this discussion series to discuss more on what to do next and how we can transition in these unprecedented times. This is a four-series discussion where the central focus is to brainstorm on how COVID-19 will change the way we do business and how we can better prepare for the recovery. The idea is also to assess if it actually opens a new era of opportunity. So last week, we had a discussion on strategy post-COVID and culture, where we discussed the life of businesses after COVID with various speakers. And today we present the second session here, which is discussing the innovation and startups from the investor's perspective. Towards the end of this session, we will have a question and answer round where our attendees will get an opportunity to ask their questions. All you need to do is click the raise hand option once, and the session is open for question and answer. You may also type your questions in the chat box. We will look into it and move our questions to the moderators. Now I would like to welcome our wonderful speakers and the moderator and briefly introduce them, while it will be great if we can hear them introduce themselves later on and tell us about their journey by themselves. So the first speaker we have today is Mr. Sidhant Raj Pandey. He's the chairman of Business Oxygen. Welcome, Siddhant, sir. We are glad to have you. The second speaker is Mr. Tim Gocher. He is the founder and CEO of Dolma Impact Fund. And likewise, our final speaker for today is Ms. Mamta Guru. She is the Asia Pacific coordinator of the Global Child Nutrition Foundation. Welcome, speakers. And it is also a pleasure to welcome our moderator, Mr. Sidhhant Raj Pandey here. He works in Entrepreneurship, and most of all, I would like to thank all the participants who have contributed their valuable time for this event. Welcome, all of you. And I also would like to welcome everyone and want to know them and their background. I mean the participants. So why don't you please write your name, where you came from, and your profession in the chat box, so that all of us could know you even more. So it is the matter of pride, honor, and joy for all of us to host you in this distinguished panel speakers. Before we move on to the formal session and I pass this to our moderator, I take this opportunity to introduce Katrin Calido, who has joined all the way from Paris. She's the partnership manager at Startup Blink, which is a global startup ecosystem map and research center. Udhyami Nepali has partnered with Startup Blink for compiling this year's Startup Blink Global Ecosystem Report for the year 2020, which is released globally on 26th of May 2020. Nepal has been ranked for the first time and ranks at 100, and Kathmandu as a city ranks at 496th position among the 1,000 cities ranked. So congratulations to all of us. This is most certainly a good news amidst the chaos of the COVID-19. And now Katrin will tell us in brief about the rankings and Startup Blink, and then we can move on to our formal session. You're welcome, Katrin, and I hand over this to you.
Okay, so hello everyone. As was said, I am Katrine, the Partnerships Manager of Startup Link. So Startup Link is a global map and research center wherein every year we have a report wherein we rank 1,000 cities and 100 countries all over the world based on their startup ecosystem. Our rankings is based on an algorithm of three primary baskets. We have a lot of other moving pieces, but those go into baskets of quantity, quality, and business. For this year, we're very lucky and we're very thankful to have Udhyami Nepali as one of our partners, and they helped us map the startups in Kathmandu. If anyone is interested to look at what Nepal's map looks like on Startup Link, I'm putting it on now on the chat box, and you can see how it looks. And it would be great as well if anyone has a startup, and they can also add their startups there directly.
Okay, thank you so much, Katrin, for introducing what are we up to. So that was it about the startup link, and we can talk more about it if somebody wants to learn what's actually happening here. So leaving it aside, I would like to move on with the formal session and hand over this to our moderator, Sushamji.
Thank you, Manaspriti. So welcome everyone to this session. It's really great that companies like you, organizations like you have been holding these kind of sessions so that people who are actually interested in doing something these days and trying to get into entrepreneurship are getting to know more from the experts. So getting to my very first question, I'd like all of the panelists to briefly introduce yourself and also tell us what motivated you into getting into entrepreneurship and investment. So starting from Siddhant.
Thank you, Dimshil Nepal, for this platform,
Mhm.
and Susham Ji for moderating this session. Um, I've been a bank for over 25 years in my previous occupation. So it's been about 5 years that I sort of jumped ship from banking into what they say is a banker organically moves into private equity, and this still happened, but it wasn't that direct. I left banking to start a consultancy management advisory group called White Lotus, and the whole intention of that was to bridge the gap between the world of development and the world of finance. So 1 year into this opportunity of private equity through business oxygen came around, and we bid for it. It was an international bid, and we won the bid. And Business Oxygen is a private equity fund, global fund, which was started by with the funding of IFC of the World Bank Group. It's part of the SME Ventures Group internationally. So they have this, IFC has this in over 20 countries globally. And Business Oxygen is the private equity in Nepal. A year into that, we had to raise some more funding for it, and we had the special strategic climate funds, PPCR, come in with some investment, and then UK's DFID also has investments with us. So we are also a climate-focused fund. Since this is a DFI fund, it is a bit different from the way private equity venture capital operates internationally. Being development focused, although we are finance first, commercial fund, we see that there's this semblance of blended finance in this fund, and we see that there has to be certain impact coming from it. So it's worked out very well. We're in our 5th year of investments. We have made 12 investments so far with 2 exits, and we still have a whole lot more to go.
All right, so let's move on to Mr. Tim.
Certainly, thank you. I've been an investment professional for many years. I think the real question is what made me start investing in Nepal. So I'm the founder and CEO of Dolma Impact Fund. And 6 years ago, or really sort of 9 years ago, I decided to start the fund. It took 2 years to raise the fund. Really, I wanted to invest in companies where I could see the difference and make an impact.
Right.
When you're sitting on Wall Street, you don't necessarily know where that money is going, whether it's doing good, whether it's doing bad. Nepal's a country I've long known. I'm married into it, and I love it. And I think to join your investment profession with what you love doing, where you love doing it, is a great thing to do. We are quite similar to Siddhant's fund. We are funded by DFIs, FMO, Fin Fund, the Austrian Development Bank, others, and some private high net worth individuals. We're focused only on Nepal. And we do invest in companies or ticket sizes between, say, $1 and $5 million. So it's not pure startup, although, you know, high growth. We really focus mostly on healthcare, tech, and renewable energy, although we do other sectors also.
Right. So, Momtazi.
Hi, first of all, congratulations to the team. Delighted to be on this panel. And as I was saying, a little bit intimidated because this is my first foray as a person, or talking about my personal investment. You know, it's a new area for me. So far, my experience with it, the only extent has been where I have a portfolio manager managing my portfolio. And the only thing I had to do was take an assessment to really group me into what kind of investment portfolio I'd match, and I was matched to a moderate. But I'd say a lot of that has been, well, I should also add, since my investment, I haven't really looked at my portfolio, so I'm hoping it's made a lot of money so I can retire in good time. But jokes aside, you know, by trade, I'm into development. I'm a development professional. I've been working primarily in the area of social development for over 15 years now, in Nepal, in Asia, as well as in the US. And I would say my personal journey into investing in the current context that we're talking about really has come when I started engaging with the folks at Nepal Communautaire. I just left my UN job back in mid-2018. And when I started co-working at Nepal Communautaire, it was so refreshing to meet a lot of young entrepreneurs who were enrolled in the business incubation program that Nepal Communautaire ran. And really, you know, to see a shift in the narrative where we were not talking about vulnerable people and beneficiaries and, you know, so on, but really talking about innovation and investment and entrepreneurship. I knew right away that when the opportunity availed, I'd like to support these startups. And so, yeah, it hasn't, they've just concluded the second cohort, and both times I have had the humble opportunity to invest. And, you know, I keep joking with the team there, saying that I'm doing investment 101, but it has certainly piqued a curiosity in me to learn more, to contribute more. And I do think there's a lot of, I think what the speakers earlier talked about, looking at the intersectionality between development and investment. So I do see some overlap there.
Thank you, Momtazi. So, briefly talking about myself, I've been engaged with Entrepreneur for over 2 years now, just over 2 years, but I've been engaged in financial sector for around 7 years. So at Entrepreneur, what we do is work primarily with startups, and we would like to call ourselves pre-incubators, actually. So we work closely with Nepal Communautaire, and we have worked closely with the entrepreneurs that Momtazi has invested previously, along with Nepal Communautaire. And yeah, that's what we do at Entrepreneur. We work with startups, entrepreneurs, and ideators, basically. So while introducing yourselves, you guys talked about a lot about impact, making an impact, and you talked about impact investment. So what exactly is impact investments for you? How does it work? So I think let's start with Mr. Tim.
Sure. To me, the simple answer to that question is investing in Nepal in industries that don't do evil things. Evil, I will qualify. You know, we don't invest in cigarettes, strong alcohol. We don't invest in any alcohol. And, you know, obvious things, arms, anyway, FDI is limited to those kind of things. I think if you invest in a country which generates jobs, in a country that needs those jobs, that then pays more taxes, that implements better governance, especially environmental and social governance, health and safety, legal governance, etc., I think you are having a positive impact. Now, the next stage of that is to measure your impact, which we do, and we measure our impact aligned to the Sustainable Development Goals. So we have an annual impact report. I think it's important to note what we don't do. We don't exclude, we measure, but we don't focus on outcomes. So in other words, you might say, you know, we have a hospital in our portfolio. You might want to measure the staff to bed or nurses to bed or doctors to bed ratio. We measure that. We don't necessarily focus on that. The target of the business plan is to make money. It's a commercial venture, but we measure the outputs and invariably they are positive.
So moving on to Montazi.
Sorry, I had to figure out how to unmute. So impact, I mean, essentially, as I said, you know, it's very small right now what I'm aiming to do, but also otherwise broadly my portfolio, for the portfolio management, what I look at is echoing what Tim just said, not to look at things that are evil, if you will, you know, that's socially conscious. Whether it's to the people, to the environment. And something also I'm very conscious about is looking at inclusivity to a good extent. I think I would say those are some of the things when broadly I'm looking at the impact that my investments are making.
Okay, so what about you, Siddhant? What are your thoughts on this?
Further to what Tim and Mamta just said, I think, you see, any investment has a byproduct as impact. You know, you invest, you're going to get X amount of employment, X amount of job creation, etc., etc. The way we look at it is that impact is an intentionality of the investment, not a byproduct. We do not just measure it as a byproduct, but it has to be an intention of what sort of impact the investments will make once we invest in it. And that starts from the time of the investment process. So for instance, ESG is very important. Environment, social governance issues are very important to IFC, and we follow those 8 guidelines that they provide. Furthermore, what we also do is that, you see, I mean, child labor is not allowed in any of our investments. We try to see that there is inclusion in our investments, etc., and how we can mold that into our business case when we invest. Environment, as I mentioned, ESG, climate financing, climate focus, you know, because climate smart approaches also have a huge impact, especially for countries like Nepal. And we're focused on small and medium enterprises. So, you know, intentionality is very important. We have to measure it from the start. And then, like Tim mentioned, we also have a mechanism where we measure that and we report. We have quarterly reports on what the impact investments have made, so on and so forth.
So my next question is specifically for Montazi. So you have been working as an angel investor. You have invested in companies like Orange Ball, and I think which is doing pretty well in these times of pandemic. Mm-hmm. So what do you think is the role of angel investors in this entrepreneurship ecosystem?
Mm-hmm. I haven't muted. Well, I think I'll start with a little bit, first of all, what motivated me, as I was saying earlier, right? Just the fact that there are opportunities within Nepal where entrepreneurs can grow their business, expand, give employability, et cetera, et cetera. And much of that, I think, value comes from, I do come from a business family, though that's never been my cup of tea. My dad's been very, very creative in that sense as a trader, and his initial business has been in partnership with quite a diverse set of individuals, a Sindhi, a Nepali Muslim, so on and so forth. And one of the first big businesses he set up was a hand-woven rug carpet that we manufactured and exported. And one thing he always said was how this allowed him to employ, we had at that point over 300 employees, and this was something that he felt he was given back to be able to invest and open up a business of that nature. Well, I didn't go that route, obviously. I went on with a job, which is still looking broadly at economic, socioeconomic conditions, so on and so forth. So with this investment opportunity through Nepal Communautaire, again, this is where I keep going back to the fact that one of Nepal's strength, I genuinely believe, is our human capital. I mean, we're talking about 30 million strong. That's not a joke at all, because I've worked with countries where the population is 20,000, So by that token, we're huge. And but unfortunately, we also know that our biggest export has been workers that leave the country and go overseas. So the fact that the entrepreneur and startup ecosystem allows for us to keep talent in country, as well as create employment opportunities for others, I thought was a win-win situation, And so essentially that's where I looked at, and Orange Ball that you mentioned, Budhibai has been amazing. I think one thing that I really found very fascinating and something that I'm always looking at is how are you able to adapt to current scenario and situation? For them, it was last year as a pest control company. Last year when the dengue crisis hit Kathmandu, right away they were able, Nepal actually, not just Kathmandu, right away they were able to adapt and bring those services to homes, whereas their primary target was businesses and tourism industry. And now with the COVID-19 crisis that we're all experiencing, they're well able to adapt to that and be creative about how to bring those services, So yeah, I don't know if I answered your question, but those are some of the reasons behind.
Yeah, so could you also highlight a little bit more on what do you think the role of angel investors is in the entrepreneurship ecosystem?
Yeah.
Like, do you think angel investors are really necessary for the entrepreneurship ecosystem, specifically in case of Nepal?
Yeah. So I think that's a good question, right? Something now I remember why I started the story with my dad's story. First of all, we already know that the environment in Nepal is such that foreign investment is few and far in between, unless it's through a development portfolio like the ones our speakers have been sharing and talking about. Secondly, if as an individual you want to start your business, we do have this culture of afno manche, right? Usually the trust factor, because we don't have a system about credit and like how do you assess all that. So it does limit the opportunity for people who may not necessarily have access to those resources, et cetera, So as an angel investor, what it allowed me was many of these companies that I invested in, I didn't know them personally. I didn't, I don't know these young individuals, but yet there was a platform which allowed me to learn about them, about their interests, their business plan, so on and so forth. And so I do think it opens up the scope to connect those who are interested and want to be involved in some capacity, and to those who need that investment.
Thank you, ma'am. So coming towards Siddhanti and Tim, so how exactly do you guys work? Like you guys are venture capitalists, and you're in that private equity sector. So it's slightly different than angel investment. So
Yes.
you did mention about you looking after impact, but could you tell us more about this?
Okay, our investment process is basically we invest in scale-up capital. That is, we don't really do startup, but having said that, we have done startups. Okay, so but we don't do angel investing. We do not do seed capital. So we do scale-up capital where we invest in equity. We do not do debt because the central bank, Nepal Rashtra Bank, does not allow non-bank and financial institutions without that license to provide debt financing. So we're restricted in just investing in equity, common and ordinary shares. So our investment horizon is anywhere between 5 to 7 years in the investments that we make. And we actually, private equity in countries like this means that we are a hand-holding mechanism. That is, we actually go in and we actually do change management, because there are a lot of SMEs that have incredibly fantastic businesses. They're doing some fantastic revenue earnings, but their systems and processes are not in place. So we go and we try to change that, make sure that they are, by the time we're done with them, they are following international best practices. They are transparent. They do not have more than one book of accounts. Nepal is known to, businesses in Nepal are known to have several books of accounts. So, they pay taxes. They're in tune with the labor laws of the country. So basically they are following good governance. So we instill upon them to do that. So the whole idea is double-pronged. Is one, to help scale up the company as well as help build the entrepreneur that the investment is in. So this is basically, in a nutshell, what our investments are all about.
So what about Dolma Impact Fund, Tim?
So, just I guess a step back, private equity definition, usually private equity and venture capital funds, which are a subset of private equity. Private equity is usually a closed-end fund. That means we have a fixed amount of years that we can operate, after which we need to liquidate, we need to sell and close down the fund. In our case, we're a 10-year fund. We can extend up to 12 years. So that means in the first 5 years, we need to have made our investments. And in the next 5 or 7 years, we need to add value and hopefully sell our investments. Private equity means just that. We invest in private companies. We don't sort of trade public securities. We invest, and just like in Sid's fund, we are very hands-on. We'll sit on the board, we'll help the management team, we'll help structure and strategize the company. So that is what it does. I think it's really, so we're sort of medium-term investors. We have up to a 10-year horizon, and that allows us some flexibility. I think it's really interesting at the moment with coronavirus, where we're actually stepping up our investments. Cash is obviously an important issue for companies right now. And private equity funds are able, because their cash flow is not dependent on the current situation. As long as they've raised the money, they have access to that money. So the difference between private equity and perhaps some corporate shareholders in SMEs or startups at the moment, those corporate shareholders themselves may be suffering from cash because of the crisis. Private equity funds, as long as they've raised that money, are not. And we're able, therefore, to invest for a longer term. We're bringing in 3 new investments this month, or next month, that we've just approved. to support our existing portfolio companies. So that gives you an idea that they're somewhat resilient to crises.
So if I am to summarize this, what I got from your answers was you guys invest in a business and help them grow, be more accountable and transparent to all the stakeholders. Yeah, right. So yeah, talking about accountability and transparency, a lot of different entrepreneurs come to us and they seem to vanish the moment we start talking about accountability and transparency. The moment we talk about them having to work on compliance issues, they just stop contacting us. Have you guys also experienced similar things?
Yeah,
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Sorry.
All the time.
Go ahead.
Well, I'll give you an example, okay? If let's say someone who's in the furniture business comes to us, I'm just giving this example, but we've had so many cases across the economic sectors who have come, and the first question is, do you pay VAT or not? Do you pay corporate tax? And they say no, but we say, all right, if you are to be on board with us with our investments, then you'll have to comply with that. The first question is, if we do that, we'll be 13% already less competitive than our competition. So they don't come back again. So, you know, these are the issues that, you know, that's the first checking the box, ticking the box for process when they come put money, come solicit for funds with us, is that, you know, they have to comply. So the ones who do say, all right, yes, I'm willing to comply with all the tax laws, I'm willing to have just one set of book of accounts, we're willing to go through your ESG program, etc. They are the ones that have come on as a part of our portfolio. To give you an example, in the 5 years, we have almost, in the 4 years, we've gone through probably 6,000 companies. And, you know, the odds are huge. I mean, we are just invested in 12, and we have another 7, 8 in active investment stage, and another 7, 8 that we are assessing. So you can just see the numbers. So, you know, I mean, the pipeline is an ongoing business in this field. Tim?
Yeah, I'll add, it's a self-selective thing. So, you know, just like Sid, if they're not prepared to, you know, whatever the reasons, comply and show that willingness to comply, you know, by definition, they're not right for Dolma. That's not to say, I think it's important to say that we're not looking for perfection. We're looking for disclosure and intent to become international standard. That doesn't happen overnight. So if somebody comes to us and said, and we ask some questions about the books, and they openly say, well, we did this and this happened and for the following reasons, that doesn't mean we disqualify the investment. It's much more about getting to a path of compliance. If we did that, there probably wouldn't be many investments in Nepal. The other thing is, we're really looking for companies with international scope. Either they want to grow internationally, or they certainly want to raise more international capital beyond the scope of Dolma Impact Fund. And in order to do that, you know, there's no way you can be non-compliant. That could be a hydro company wanting to build hundreds and hundreds of megawatts, and obviously for that would require foreign direct investment. It could be a company like Cloud Factory that did a venture capital round in the US successfully. We really see ourselves as that bridge. So it's not sort of Dolma's money is the be all and end all. Dolma's money is very much that bridge to international capital, and part of that preparation is to make sure of compliance. So the main thing is the intention of the owners and the entrepreneurs to be compliant and come with us on that journey.
So thank you, Tim. So that brings me to Momtaji. Angel investment works slightly differently than other forms of investment. So how exactly did you end up investing in Buddhaji, in Orange Ball? Was he compliant, or like is he progressing in that part right now? Now that many of you have invested in him. Mamtaji? Mamtaji, are you there?
Looks like we
Yeah.
should move on with the other questions until she's back.
Yeah, let's hold on to that. So, yeah, now that we are in this pandemic and we don't know when this lockdown will be over, so what are the situation of the companies that you have invested in, Mr. Tim and Mr. Siddhant? Are they doing well or are they struggling? What's the condition right now?
Sid, after you.
Tim, do you want to answer? I'll follow. Okay. See, not all companies are in the same shape or stage as the others. Each and every one of them have their own problems. So as soon as this lockdown started, we had a business continuity plan for each and every one of them that we've invested in, and the ones we're about to invest in. Some have problems with, some have problems on the, the supply chain has been disrupted. So, raw materials are not coming into their factories or their businesses. Others have problems with capital. Working capital there's a dearth of working capital. And each and every one of them have different problems. But what we've noticed that all of these problems, one problem that is similar to all of them is labor. Everyone has problems with labor in one form or the other during this lockdown period. And there's very little you can do according to that lockdown. So during this lockdown, so what we've done is we've advised companies to try to be relevant if they can. See, cash flow is a huge problem. They can't. So there are plans in place whether they start paying staffs 30, 40, 50% of their salaries, how much they can. None of our companies have actually not paid any, have not deprived their salaries to any of their workers. They have, for the past 2 months, they've been paying 100%. Now, coming to this third month, they would probably have to retrench a bit and give a certain percentage of the salaries. Now, the other problem is the supply disruption, getting parts, components for the factories, getting raw materials in, and that's something that is beyond the control. So they have to wait it out. Now, one of the biggest problems that we're facing is how long will this lockdown last? I mean, this is an unprecedented event, and I think in our lifetime. I don't think any time in our history have we ever gone through almost 2.5 months of lockdown where businesses have been at a standstill. So, the jury's out on what's going to happen to all these businesses and how they plan to come out of it. Now, as private equity investors, as Tim earlier mentioned, we are ready to pump in more money, but it's not that simple. It's not just writing a check, you see. For us, we have to comply with foreign direct investment rules and regulations. And the government is very, very slow in approving FDI, even if it's top-on investments. You have to go through this process that can take several months. Now we're trying to once the lockdown is lifted, we will approach the government to expedite the processes so that we can start pumping in funds. And we've got several of our files that are awaiting FDI approval right now. And those companies would like to see that money come through as soon as possible. So, the time is the essence. I mean, no one knows how this is going to pan out to be. This is absolutely ridiculous what we have had to go through. And things are going to get even worse before they start getting better. But, we have to live with the situation. So we try to plan according to how we can help our companies come out of this unscathed. Tim?
Sure. So mixed bag in our portfolio. Energy, which is hydro and solar construction at the moment. Obviously, severe delays. Labor, workforce. There is some work going on. Also, electromechanical equipment stuck at the border. So it's basically delay and cost overrun is the effect. in technology, well, I mean, Sastadil is perhaps one of the winners. While they've been able to sell less goods, actually they very quickly brought in FMCG and essentials into their categories. They've increased delivery, and it's really, in fact, been quite an engaging time for Sastadil. Cloud Factory Fuse Machines, they're kind of a remote workforce. And while, yes, there's been some loss in clients, actually, I think remote workforces in the medium term for, of course, American clients are going to, have even more demand. The really interesting one for me is healthcare. We have a pharmaceutical factory that very quickly started manufacturing hand sanitizer, which has been selling very well. Our hospital is the most affected because they shut down OPD departments. There was actually a suspected case of coronavirus. In the end, it wasn't, but that shut down the hospital altogether. So their cash flow is severely restricted. Now, coming to Sid's point about the bureaucracy of getting foreign money in the country, this is going to be very interesting because in the next couple of weeks, we're going to want to draw down some money to keep that hospital going. And if they take 3 months to give us that approval, there won't be a hospital. And the last thing you want during a health crisis is to be shutting down hospitals because you are defaulting on your loans. And so that is the kind of issue that we're going to face. Overall, there's no crisis in the portfolio. Whether the bureaucracy can respond to the urgency of the crisis and allow money in to keep companies afloat is going to be the interesting factor.
True, very true. So at Entrepreneur, we are now focusing more on health sector and agriculture and entrepreneurs working in the job market, job solution market. So has there been similar changes back in your companies, or the kind of investments that you are trying to make or going to make in the near future in this post-COVID world? Mr. Siddhant.
Yes, we have, we call this counter-cyclical industries or defensive industries, which, no matter what happens, they continue to do well. And healthcare is one industry that seems to be, the food industry, the healthcare industry, industries that seem to be doing very well. Well, they're above water anyways. They're earning some revenue even under this COVID-19 lockdown. So yes, we have a few of those. We're about to invest in a pharmaceutical company. So we have great expectations of them making molecules, basically medicines for Nepal. And we're also looking at investing in agro-processing business, where food stuff can be processed and sold within the country. So I see enormous potential moving forward as soon as the lockdown is lifted. And having said that, the companies that we are invested in, such as like Dolma Momo, I'm sure all of you have had your Dolma Momos one time or the other. They have transformed into something different from what they were. Yes, they do provide momos, but they never used to provide frozen momos through delivery service. During this lockdown, their sales are quite high in terms of providing frozen momos through delivery services to the homes. Now, these are sort of transformations that businesses have to think to survive. The sales are not as it used to be pre-COVID-19 lockdown, but at least they have some money coming in to make up for their overhead costs. We've got Health at Home, which also has started to provide pharmaceutical medicines to homes through delivery, providing masks, etc. So, companies that can think out of the box and be transformative can survive. Tim?
So, Mr. Tim, would you like to add anything on this?
I think this is, as an investor, this is perhaps the most exciting time to look at opportunities. I don't mean that from a companies are desperate for cash and we can get a good valuation. I mean that from a real growth perspective. These times are when we look at our economies and see where the gaps are. So healthcare, obviously. Where we would like to go is, what we have seen is that Kathmandu has obviously much better health capacity than other parts of the country. So we would love to be looking at more regional healthcare than more capacity in Kathmandu. Things like dialysis clinics, diabetes clinics, that kind of thing, primary points of care. I'm really excited about AI and telemedicine and using technology to leapfrog into those regions and more remote areas where it would take too long to build up healthcare infrastructure. Technology more generally, fintech, education technology, things that we've all learned about that actually I don't think we will go back to tertiary education, at least in the same way. Obviously there'll be campuses, but I think some of them, one of the colleges I'm talking to, they have had an increase in their attendance in lectures since they went online. So, you know, are we going to see different campuses? Either way, the technology that lubricates the new world post-COVID is a very interesting area for us to invest. So I do think that, you know, healthcare and tech and AI, I think are fascinating opportunities because of coronavirus, and that's where we're focused.
So we did talk about opportunities. Now let's move on to the challenges in investing. Like while we talk about investment cases, we always compare it with back at Entrepreneur. We always compare it with getting infatuated and being ready for marriage. Like it's really easy to get infatuated by someone, but then that journey towards marriage is a really long one, right? So we, when we talk about marriage, we start talking about their families, their backgrounds, and whatnot. So there are a lot of challenges, and likewise is what Siddhant said as well. So they have worked with almost 6,000 cases, and they have only invested in 12, and 7 to 8 are in the pipeline. So why is it so difficult getting into that investment journey? Like what are the major challenges according to you guys for investment deal to close?
How long does
it asking me?
I'm asking to all of you actually. I'm sorry. Sorry for the confusion.
Tim, why don't you go through? I'm going to switch my Tim, why don't you go through, because I need to switch my internet connection right now because it's dying on me.
No problem.
All right. So Tim,
you know, how long does it take when you date to get married? It's probably, you probably want to make an informed decision there as well. You know, the main thing is, what it all boils down to is people, I think, and trust. I think you forget that. You think, well, you know, Dolma is backed by giant European banks and institutions, same with Sid, multilateral in his case. But they're not faceless. It's actually, do we trust the people? Sometimes we get it right, sometimes we get it wrong. But that trust takes a while to build up. The trust, the intention, again, it's not about looking back at a company's performance and seeing everything was perfect and everything was always growing and profitable and everything else. It's about looking forward and buying into that management team. I think that becomes really important now when we're looking to invest more money in existing companies who are challenged by coronavirus. You know, the numbers don't look great, but do you trust the team that you've invested in? I think that's why it takes a while. The actual number crunching due diligence probably only takes a month or two, but it's trust.
Yes, further to what Tim said, the integrity due diligence is very important. Because, you know, as you go through the process of investment, you come across new things. You realize that the tax liabilities on the company could be so huge that it'll come and haunt you later on in the future. You don't want that, you see. And so if they're really interested, they better clear up their previous tax liabilities before they come on board with us. And furthermore, the other thing is, exit is another very important issue when we are looking at investments. There has to be a clear vision on how the entrepreneurs are willing to exit you. At least they have to have it in their minds that in 5, 6, 7 years of us putting money into them, they need to find a modality of how they plan to exit. And in Nepal, you know, it's not that simple. Exits are very confined to a few processes. We invest in SMEs, so IPOs are pretty much out of the question. So, you know, it has to be sponsored buyback, or it has to be third-party buyback, or we also are looking for investments in companies that are attractive to other foreign investors, so they can later on sell some of their shares to a bigger player, etc. And you know, all these have to be put into the process of investment and has to be discussed early on so that there are no surprises. So, but at the end of the day, it is, as Tim mentioned, intent of the investee and how you read between the lines to figure that intent out.
Thank you, Siddhant. So, Momtazi, would you like to add something on this? Like, what do you think are the major challenges that you have faced while investing in a company?
Yeah, sure. I think the one.
I think her internet connection is slightly unstable.
Sorry, my activity is really bad. Like I've been going in and out. I do want to add one thing to what
all right, I think we'll have to wait for some time. So before I leave the platform to the public for their question answer, is there any message that our esteemed panelists would like to give to all the investment seeking companies out there? So starting with Siddhant, sir.
I think, you know, this COVID-19 is a very difficult situation for all of us, but I don't think it is, I think it's a huge opportunity for all of us in Nepal to sort of plan ahead and work accordingly. We are looking for investments that have import substitution agenda or a plan so that, you know, we can stop importing things and be more self-reliant, and would be more than happy to look into investments like that. I think going forward, human resources is not going to be a big problem as it has been in the past, because I think that is a plus point if we can find to incorporate all these people coming back. And our companies are always in need of a human resource. I see if the government can assist in panning out this coming months and years, I think there's a huge potential and positive possibility for all of us moving forward. Tim?
Thank you, Mr. Siddhant. Tim.
Yeah, this is for the government and for the entrepreneurs. Nepal is already a very attractive place to invest. It's obviously very high risk, but it's also wide open. 30 million people, changing market, COVID aside, increasing expenditure, very exciting market. What holds it back is government bureaucracy. And I think what the government does in response, you know, I've mentioned FDI, every sort of license you go for, if there can be that sense of urgency. But really the reason I think it's important is that foreign directors look at Nepal in a similar category to kind of Afghanistan, which is completely wrong. because they don't know Nepal. They're sitting in the city of London. They think Nepal is just sort of, what are you talking about? And, you know, I'm going to put money into Nepal. Actually, when you look at it, the government pays its bills, the NEA pays its bills, the institutions might not be perfect, but they're there. There's not much risk of security, sort of war and things like that. So yeah, actually, it's a much less risky country than people think it is if the government can just let investment flow. To entrepreneurs, this is the time. It's a tough time, and this is when people prove themselves or not. We've seen some of our companies produce their most incredible and inspiring performances of leadership in these last 2 months. And I think if you believe in what you're doing, sure, it's going to be tough, but if you believe in what you're doing and you get through it, you will look back at this time as the most formative time for your business, your startup, your venture. So keep the belief, keep going, because this will not last forever. And what you do in this time, you will always remember.
Thank you, Tim. That was really nice. So, Momtazi, any last words for our audience? You have to unmute your.
I think what I'd say is, you know, I got the little bit that I caught. I'm sorry, my connectivity has been really bad. I've moved location, so hopefully you can hear me better. Stability, I think we already talked about that. And something that essentially I think we should all look for is how creatively we can respond to things and crisis, particularly in Nepal. We've been through earthquake, we've been through so many different situations, and now with the global pandemic, you know. So businesses that are willing and flexible to be able to respond to that in real time, I think is certainly an appealing factor. We talked already about human capital being such a strong force. As the workforce now comes back to Nepal, I think we really need to be prepared. They're going to be looking for opportunities and avenues to be engaged, you know, and I really think if we invest properly in that, slowly but steadily, the economy will grow, and the situation in the country will also improve in terms of how we're able to invest and get the return on the investment.
Right. Thank you, Momtazi. So if I may conclude from all the answers and all the interaction that we have done in the past hour. So it's really a difficult time right now, but it's a time full of opportunities. And although there are a lot of challenges in it, we do have a lot to look on and look forward to. And yeah, so for investment as well. So investment, getting an investment is not easy as it seems, but it's also not that difficult. And it's not that you just have to have an outstanding idea to get investment. There are certain rules and regulations that you need to abide by. But having said that, even if you are not able to do that, but are really looking forward to be compliant and transparent, we are there to help you. Yeah. So yeah, now passing on to Manusmriti, the floor is open for question and answers to our audience.
Okay, thank you very much, Sushamji, for passing it on to me. Well, I think the conversations were really insightful and really nice. And as a result of the very great conversation, there are a lot of questions by our participants in the chat box. So I would like to, I really appreciate for all the questions, and I'll try to be as inclusive as possible and try to include and address all the questions if possible. So the first question we got is from Mr. Ashraya Dikshit. He writes, hi, I'm Ashraya from Boston. So first of all, you're most welcome, Ashraya-ji. You're joining from far away. So his question is, why is liquidity such an issue? Can't the hospital get short-term financing from the local banks? I think he asked this question who can answer his question?
Probably
Tim said there's investment in health, yeah.
Yeah, well, I mean, if you're a bank and you look at a company that's about to default on its loans already, you're probably not going to issue any more credit. This is something where in the UK, governments backed to a certain limited extent lending from back. So they provided 100% guarantee. Obviously, that's not the case in Nepal. So banks still have a fiduciary duty to make sure their loan is going to be repaid. If you look at a company and that's not the case because cash flow has tanked and you're about to default, that's why credit isn't necessarily available. And that's where private equity, putting more equity into a company is essential. I'd love to see the government guaranteeing short-term loans for the crisis. I'm not sure that's going to happen, but that's the reason.
Okay. Thank you, team. I think he made your question, he made your query very clear, Ashayji. So we have one participant raising hand for a very long time. He has also written a lot of questions in the chat box. Mr. Ranadeep Shaha, can you please unmute your mic and ask the question to the speakers, please?
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. So I actually have like two questions for both Mr. Tim and Siddhant. So whoever wants to take those questions. So one of those questions were like regarding BO2's strategy as well as Dolma's strategy. Is like do you guys invest on companies just to like take them and like resell them and flip them later on, or like is your exit strategy more towards the IPO strategy? So that's one of the questions. And the second question is, what are your thoughts on the 5 crore threshold that the government had imposed on startups? And should the government be more lenient on that post-COVID so they can create more jobs and maybe give them some tax benefits?
Shall I start? Okay. Business Oxygen doesn't really look at the IPO strategy as an exit, unless it's a larger company. We actually concentrate on SMEs. So IPOs for SMEs just doesn't make sense, not in this market anyway. So we have one case that may go through an IPO, but there are problems with that because there's this holding period of 3 years after that that can restrain the exit of a private equity investor. That can be very limiting because you need to have equity. You need to be able to sell out when you want to sell out. So until these limitations are lifted, then I don't think we would be looking at IPOs as an exit for our investments. Now, your other question was on the 5 crore limit, which I think is very retrogressive. It should not be. I think, throughout the neighborhood that is in South Asia, India doesn't even have a limit anymore, but many countries have $50,000 as a limit for any sort of FDI entry. I think this is limiting the potential of FDI coming in because what they have looked at it for a while, they brought this regulation in play was not looking at the ICT sector where you don't really need that much investments. Okay, so this is actually prohibiting any sort of technology investments coming into the country, and it's also looking at FDI as only as a capital injection, not looking at it as from a knowledge transfer point of view. So you could have a very small investment, but the knowledge transfer can be huge. For instance, Standard Chartered, when they came into the country, the paid-up capital at that time was 3 crores. Now look at the technology transfer of international banking that came along with that capital. So you cannot, but unfortunately our policymakers do not look at it from that point of view. They look at it from a very quantitative point of view, and it's not qualitative. Tim, you want to add to that?
I'm not going to add to the 5 crore limit other than to say I completely agree with you. On the exit question, we do invest in larger companies. We are looking at IPO for our hydro and solar companies. And I think it's well suited to that. The problem is beyond that. Restrictions, as Sid said, on lock-in periods. If you're a 10-year fund and you have to build a company, IPO, and then wait for 3 years, you probably can't do it. The other thing is pricing strategies. You know, if you have to, unless you've got 3 years of profits and dividends, you can't issue at a premium, and even then there are some limits. That is improving. I mean, I do think the Siddhant are quite progressive, but at the moment it would preclude any of our non-energy companies from listing. And herein lies an interesting point. I mean, Nepal's M&A activity domestically is fairly small. So if we're investing sort of $3-5 million and we need to exit, hopefully 2 times that or some multiple of that, it's difficult to find a buyer in Nepal. So we find ourselves spending a lot of time abroad in India, in the US, in other countries, to try to build awareness of Nepal in advance, not when we need an exit, but long before we need an exit. So I think our exits through trade sales or venture capital in the case of tech companies is more likely than in Nepal.
That pretty much answers the question.
Okay, yeah. Thank you for your question as well as your answer. Well, now we are getting a lot of questions and we are running out of time, so let's make it as quick as possible. Maybe we can shorten our questions or answers or anything that's possible. So here's next question by Anil Parazuli. He writes, in general, we see private equity and venture capitalists invest on ideation and incubation companies as a way to create a pipeline. How are your pipeline plans in this regard? So who would answer this question? Siddhant sir, maybe?
We always, briefly, because of course, we are always on the lookout for companies, and a robust pipeline is always welcome. And we do, that's why we go through so many companies. I, along with my colleagues, are always participating in various demo and program judging various startups, etc. And sometimes you do come across some really good ones. Karkhana is one of them that came out from all this, and we've already invested in Karkhana. So it is an ongoing process. So you have to keep on fishing.
I don't have anything to add. We do exactly the same thing. The ecosystem is essential. We might not invest in, pure startups, but we are very vested in the success of companies growing that can come into our pipeline.
Okay. Thank you so much, Siddhant sir and Tim. Mamta ji, do you have anything to add to this? I think this would be very much relevant to you too.
Well, I don't know if it is, but one thing I can say is, as a potential investor, I do go to different demos and stuff like that just to get an understanding and align my interests to what are some of the potentials and who are looking for seed investment. So it's very different to what Tim and Sid does, but essentially starting and supporting the startup culture. So that would be my contribution.
Okay, thank you. So moving on to the next question, we have a very important question from Mr. Atish Shrestha. So I think Mamta ji could answer his question. He has written, I have a question related to financial integrity. How do you assure that the company where you have invested does not get involved in financial mismanagement, misappropriation? Do you control financial integrity on those companies following any of the below mentioned options? And the options, yes, listed are sending your representative in managerial position in the company, or keeping the control on the fund of the company, for instance, by keeping the bank account under your direct control, by keeping the authorized signatory of the bank account, or by making the procurement of goods, assets, and human resources centrally at your end. So
sure, I can attempt to respond to that. From my experience, having supported the incubees at Nepal community, I know one of the things that I found attractive was, opening up to the investors to see if anybody would like to be on the board. Again, as I mentioned earlier, this is not a cohort of individuals that we already had personal relationship or what have you. Generally, that's the trend, right? And so I think that level of transparency does create a certain level of trust as well. And so I think it works both ways, where as an investor, and if you are playing a role in the board and you're representing the board, so it's not just from the business perspective, the entrepreneur's perspective, but from the investor's perspective also, we're able to have more view into what's going on internally. I think that's the experience that I have. I won't be able to elaborate on it much, though, on the other points that were raised.
Okay, thank you very much, Mamtaji. I think that somehow answers the query of our participant, I think. Even though we have a number of questions, I would like to make this a very last question because of the time that is running. So this is the question from Nirmal Gorti to Siddhant sir. He says, do you see a need of policy from government that set apart startups from the other regular companies, and it gives those startups a privilege like registration of business, follow less compliance, or other regulation?
Well, startups have had a mention in this budget with facilitation of 2% interest rate for, I don't know what the limit is and I don't know what the amount is, but the government has mentioned startup as going to be provided a privileged interest rate for their venture. And there's also talk of a knowledge park as well. I believe this has been going on. Even last year, they had certain amount earmarked for startups, and but the government, it never takes off because they're not clear on what they want. No, I don't really think. I think yes, startups need to have a platform where the government provides the infrastructure so that companies that have potential can go there, and the government provides mentors and they have a workspace, etc. But I don't think seed money should be provided by the government. It is not the job of the government to do that, but to be a facilitator. In terms of transparency and following accounting processes and procedures, I don't see why a startup should be given any different sort of treatment than any other business. That's the point. They need to learn to be accountable from the start. So I think the role of the government should be more as a facilitator, providing a venue where startups and investors and mentors can meet to help each other out, but not provide seed money. See, as an investor, the most important thing that an investor wants to see is how the startup or the entrepreneur has bootstrapped and how he has made it through various rounds of raising funds by himself to bring it to a certain level. That shows commitment, that shows tenacity, and investors are always looking for that. I hope I've answered the question.
Okay, thank you very much, Siddhant, for answering the last question for today. And also, I would like to extend a very special thank you to our participants for bringing in a lot of good questions and very much relatable and relevant questions. I could also learn a lot from the question and answer session myself. So I think it was a pretty much insightful session for all of us over here. Now we have come to the end of this session, and Before we close the session formally, I would like to ask the speakers and our moderator to give the concluding remarks. How did you feel about today's session, talking to the like diverse group of participants, and then about the business and entrepreneurship ecosystem of Nepal. And so since we have a very special guest all the way from Paris today, Katrine, here with us, I would like to hear her perspective of the event. Okay, Katrine, would you like to share us how you feel about this event?
Yeah, so again, thank you for inviting me. And I really think that this event is really good. It really shows that Nepal is really growing as an ecosystem. And we did see it in our report this year that Nepal ranks for the first time. It's really hard to get into the top 100 because there are 200, almost 200 countries. And seeing the event today, it really shows that there is interest in startups and building startups in Nepal, and we hope to see it grow in the next few years, and maybe in 2021 ranking higher together with Kathmandu. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Katrin. I hope you'll be able to join us in the future as well, and then we will be able to work on a lot of sectors in the days to come. Thank you so much for joining. Means a lot to us. Okay, so that was it from Katrin, and now I would like to hear the perspectives of our speakers. So who wants to share about your experience today, and then also as a share it as a concluding remarks?
I can go. Well, for me, it was an interesting experience. As I said at the outset, a relatively new field for me. But I'm excited. I did learn a lot, just trying to keep up even with the jargon. So I'm always up for challenges. Despite all of the issues that's there in the country, I think there is so much scope and opportunity, and I'm kind of excited to see that grow. Especially with a lot of the homegrown sort of, the interest in the homegrown approach that the Nepalis are looking at. I also learned, I was always curious how Dale was able to expand so much. Now I learned where that investment came from. But I do want to congratulate all of you, and I think these are really good platforms to pique the interest of those who want to learn more, but also genuinely seek to pursue these avenues.
Okay. Thank you, Mamtaji. It was also our honor to have you as a speaker, and then your experiences and your perspectives are very much insightful and helpful for all of us, I believe. So Siddhant sir, would you want to share about your experience today?
Well, I was very pleasantly to hear that out of 1,000 startups that were Nepal ranked 496 in that whatever that poll was. I was very amazed to hear that, and that's really good. I didn't realize that we had advanced so much. Okay, today's discourse very interesting. I mean, DO2, Dolma, we have been in the same boat, so Tim and I shared trials and tribulations and have swum against the tide many times. And but I think we have under the same sort of conclusion that there are exciting times ahead, and I think we are on the same page when it comes to the potential of what Nepal has to offer. Now, in terms of Mamtaji's startups and investments, it's really good to see that, I think she's braver than all of us combined to do so. At least we have the virtue of hindsight, which is we do scale up companies which have a track record, but startups normally don't have that track record. So she's very bold to have done that. We need many more people like her to do so. But Udhyami Nepal, I mean, thank you very much for having all of us here to discuss this very important issue, which is investments. And today we're FDI investors, and we're one of the few who have the capacity to bring hard currency into the country. I just hope that the policy makers understand the importance of private equity, especially in an environment like this where we're going through a global crisis, which could help in this country's economy enormously.
Okay, thank you very much, Siddhant sir. That was a great reflection. Now I would want to hear from Tim.
You know, this ecosystem represented here is one. Without, you take any one part out of an ecosystem, it'll fail. And I think it's really important at times of crisis, especially, that, you know, we share ideas. The questions that come through, we learn all the time, we feed that back. Entrepreneurship and entrepreneurs are the future of Nepal, and that comes into an even sharper spotlight given the potential amount of returnees. So job creation is essential, and the only sustainable way to do that, obviously, is through the private sector. So, you know, we must keep believing. And if you want to see progress, think back when BO2 and Dolma started sort of 5 or 6 years ago, about the same time. There now have been a number of investments. We have made a number of exits between us and other funds and other investors. There is money out there. There may not be enough, but there is money out there, and there is growth, and there are now role models and success stories out there. So keep the belief and keep going.
Okay, thank you so much, team. It was a great learning for me myself as well. Even though I'm working with the entrepreneurs and this sector, I have a lot to learn. And then, like you said, we share ideas and then we learn from each other. And entrepreneurship is the future of Nepal in terms of job creations and a lot of other things. So it was a great learning for me myself, and then I believe it is the same for the participants. Well, that was it from the speakers, and we have a wonderful moderator today, Mr. Sidhhant Raj Pandey. I would also want to hear his perspective and his reflection of today's session.
Yeah, it was really a wonderful session. I personally learned a lot. And yeah, talking about the future, I think this is a time to do. Like, this is a time when, like Siddhant sir said earlier, many people will come back to Nepal, and we're not going to have that shortage of labor. So, and exciting times are coming ahead. So this is a time when you actually work on your ideas and see if you can go ahead, right? And if you have any sort of difficulties in regards to finances or business management, there are always companies and organizations like BO2, Dolma, and there are angel investors like Mamtaji, and there are incubators like Entrepreneur and Nepal Community that's always there for you. So just start doing it, start working on your ideas.
Yeah, I think that is a very important message to all the aspiring entrepreneurs and the people who want to work on this sector through startups and their own initiatives. Thank you so much, Sushantji, for your wonderful message. Now we have come to the literal end of today's session. I again would like to thank all the speakers, our moderator, and all the participants for being with us. And special thank you goes to Mr. Kailash Pandey, who has been constantly advising us, mentoring us, and then guiding us, and my teammates Meda and Ruby, who are my backbones for doing all the things. So they deserve special thank you and appreciation. And by saying this, I would like to end this. So we will be coming with a part of this series in the days to come as well. It is a 4-series discussion, and then this is the second one, so that we still have the 2 events coming up. So be with us, attend all the events with us, and then learn a lot. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Stay
Thank
safe,
you.
everybody.
Bye-bye. Take care.